what are, I don't know, what are some of the top things you like about the process, and what are some of the things you wish would change about the FOIA process?
Well, a lot of people bash FOIA, and what I've learned over the years is that the people that bash FOIA 99.9% of the time have never used it, and
Totally.
largely
Totally.
don't understand it.
Yeah.
FOIA is not perfect. There's two things that I always say up front that I think a lot of people forget about me. The FOIA is not the end all be all. I've never said that. I've never believed in that. Even from when I was 15, knew that the government was hiding something. I wasn't sure to what extent. I mean, I was just starting my research, but I never thought that the FOIA would give me that smoking gun. But what it does do is it offers kind of a peek behind the curtains. It starts giving you pieces of evidence that, if you didn't request it, would likely never see the light of day. And I've got literally millions of pages of examples to that, to where the government just doesn't start releasing their information to you. A lot of times you have to fight for it. So that's one of the great things about FOIA is, again, if you're looking for the alien smoking gun, you're likely not going to find that. Hopefully I'm proven wrong one day. But that's not what it's about. What it's about is trying to get every piece of the puzzle that you would otherwise not get. And I think that that's what a lot of people who bash the FOIA just really don't understand, in that it does offer that peek behind the curtain. But there's also downsides to it. I mean, there's a lot of shortcomings to it, like the amount of time that you sometimes wait, which can extend over a decade in time, to where when you file a
Wow.
request, takes them years, sometimes over a
Wow.
decade. My record is 14 and a half years waiting for a
No
document to
way.
come. Yeah, I
No
wish I
way.
was kidding.
14
14 and
and
a
a
half.
half
Yeah,
years. What the
that's right.
hell? I mean, by
Yeah,
then
just
you've
last
moved
week I
on.
published one that was a
Like,
decade, nearly a decade. So it's like,
my
you
God.
look at that and it's like, wow, FOIA needs help, and it absolutely does. So it's by far not perfect, but it is an
No.
incredibly powerful tool to give you access to documents, like I said, that would never see the light of day in most of the cases if you have to go after it through FOIA. So there's a lot of pluses to it, and it's something that I think shouldn't be discounted. And one of the things I always get a kick out of is usually the people that bash FOIA and say you're never going to get anything good by it. I've seen time and time again those same exact people tout FOIA documents to prove how important the UFO topic is. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I thought FOIA didn't prove anything, And I
Yeah.
don't know if they're willingly or knowingly doing it, or what. But it's clear FOIA has a value, and it has a value for numerous reasons. And it's one that I fully support the freedom of. And although I know that it needs help, man, it gets you some stuff, and sometimes you have to sift through a haystack for that needle, but sometimes that needle comes at you and it's golden.
What's like the greatest document you've gotten from FOIA, and what's the biggest disappointment you feel you've gotten from FOIA?
That's always a tough question to answer, only because it depends on what you're looking for. Even with just saying, hey, what's the best UFO document? It's so hard because there is so much there. And I think that that's another misconception about me, albeit I'm very skeptical about the claims of today, and the David Grusch type stories where they're holding alien bodies and wreckage and so on. Although I'm skeptical about that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
there are so many documents that you could name to answer your question that support that this is a massive cover up of some kind. We're not covering up drones and balloons in totality. It's part of the conversation, absolutely, but that's not everything. And I know that some skeptics and debunkers out there think that that's all that this is now, but it's not. And I think that the documentation proves that, because when you go back in time and you start looking at CIA documents, you start looking at DIA documents, start looking at NSA documents, just those three agencies alone off the top of my head have hundreds upon hundreds, even well over 1,000 pages that shouldn't even exist. And if you take what I call the government's company line about UFOs, yet they do. And it shows that whatever these phenomena are, because I think there's multiple facets to it, so I use the plural version, but whatever these phenomena are, it is something at the top secret level in many cases. On top of that, I believe that it's easily proven not exempt through just sources and methods. Another thing a lot of skeptics and debunkers, including the government itself, falls back on. So you can start like kind of notching these things off the list of why these documents exist and why they are so heavily classified and redacted. So it's the long way of answering your question, and I'm not dodging it, but it's so hard to round it down to one or two records because it
Sure.
depends on how you look at this. I can tell you some of my top favorites include an Air Force manual. This was well before even ATIP or OSAP or any of those stories existed back in the early 2000s, where the United States Air Force, the one military branch that has been mum about this topic as a whole, had a regulation on the books that was actively updated. I was able to prove that through FOIA, nothing left over from the 1960s, that instructed them to report unidentified flying objects. That's a quote. UFOs was in there. And yet they were claiming, hey, we did this through the 60s. We don't care. Don't bother us with your story. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they had this manual, specifically it's Air Force instruction 10-206, if anybody's taking notes, that it was on the books. And at the time, the Huffington Post was going to profile a couple documents that I had come forward, very much rooted to the question that you asked, what's some of the faves and most popular. And so I had given him that one. And to make this kind of longer story short, they were pushing the Pentagon for an answer, saying, hey, you guys are saying one thing, but look at this document that came out through FOIA. John's got it online, and you can actually download it from the Air Force website. This was true, again, back in the mid to late 2000s. So what happened? Within 48 hours of the Huffington Post pushing that question with the Pentagon, and they never responded to them until after they completely rewrote Air Force Instruction 10-206, removed the entire Chapter 5, which included UFOs in it, and then got back to the Huffington Post and said, oh, well, that was just something left over. We were updating it and so on. Within 48 hours of them highlighting this. And credit to the late Lee Spiegel, a friend of mine for many, many years, who sadly passed away here in the last few months. But a great investigative journalist, and he was the one that was pushing the Pentagon on that. So that's one document, right? I mean, that whole story in itself is something fascinating. But then when you look at some of the specific cases, like the 1976 Iran incident that has been around, UFO books and conversations for decades, but you look at that and you realize, hey, this was post Project Blue Book. This was something that we cannot explain here in 2024 still. There's no good skeptical analysis of this. But on top of that, the U.S. government, and this is provable by additional documents that came out, the case itself went all the way to the White House. And the point being is that even post Project Blue Book, the president himself was still getting these UFO reports on a phenomenon that didn't exist. That didn't make sense. So when you look at all that evidence, there are lots of documents that you can kind of fill in the blank there to answer your question. And that's just a couple of them.
Yeah, right on. I mean, honestly, that answer is telling unto itself. The fact that there's not some document right off that you fire off, right? Like this one is, super, whatever. That's interesting in and of itself, that answer, right? Considering how many documents you have FOIA'd, the database that you have, how long you've been doing this, that's very telling. It's like, remember when I interviewed James Fox, the whole reason I even started Vetted after he'd done Moment of Contact, and I interviewed him. And I asked him, hey, well, what do you think about this, phenomenon? Like, what are your personal beliefs? And he's like, well, I'm at this, I don't know. Right. It's his definitive answer is, I don't know what's going on. I'm at the same place I was when I started 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I thought that's interesting. Right. Do you feel kind of the same way? Like you're at the same wall you've been at since you began looking at, like, everything takes you laterally. It doesn't take you forward, or it takes you back, right? Is that how you feel? Or I don't know. I'm curious.
So not to you respectfully disagree with my friend James Fox, but from my own personal point of view, I do feel that I've changed a lot in the last 27 years, but I feel that's on a few different fronts. I feel that it reinforces my belief that I had determined when I was a teenager that the government is covering this up, that it's not an easy answer, that this isn't sources and methods or their government top secret programs, and that explains it all. I don't think that it's that easy. But here, 27 plus years later, I've also become more skeptical. I've been more cautious on who I listen to and who I essentially collaborate with, just simply because you have so much crud out there that you have to sift through. That has made me much more skeptical. I don't find that a bad thing. I know that there are some circles that don't like me for that reason. And it's because in one breath, I can say with evidence, this is a massive cover-up. I can find nuclear weapons secrets easier than I can UFO information. I can prove that to you with government documents and FOIA cases that go back decades. But in the same breath, I can say, yeah, you know what? I am skeptical about the claims of Luis Elizondo or David Grusch or both of them, simply because of the lack of evidence that's there. And you have to look at every small piece of the puzzle and put it all together. And in my book, it's okay to say those two things in the same breath, meaning it's okay to say, I question this story because, but it's also okay to be open to either direction that the answers may flow to you, you know. And this recent David Grusch document batch that I got from the government, that is kind of proof that it's like, well, I'm wanting the answers. I want every little piece of the puzzle, but I can't control where they go, you know. And I think that there's a lot of selective belief out there by some people. So to go back to your question, I feel that I have changed a lot, but I feel that where I was when I was 15, when I started, has also been reinforced a lot. So I think it kind of goes to both sides of the debate.
Yeah, right on. What year were you born, John? Am I allowed to ask that? I don't want to push.
No, that's okay. 43 years ago yesterday, well, at least when we're recording this, in 1981. I'm getting old.
That's right. Happy birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
belated birthday.
Thanks.
81. Okay, I'm a 79 baby. All right, so we're basically the same.
So is my wife. Although I
same
shouldn't have said
age.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always give her a hard time. A little bit younger, born in a different decade. I know I can't say that.
You can't be doing that, man.
I know.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, that's cool. So we're about the same age. All right, yeah, I get it. No, that's a great answer. Look, let's go into the David Grusch after I ask you this last question. Because I get asked this too all the time. Not that I think it's important, but I think a lot of my audience will want to know the answer. So that's why I'm going to ask. What are your overall thoughts? Like, I know using believe is a interesting word to use, but just for conversation's sake, I'll use that word. Like, what do you believe about the phenomena? Like, are you 100% sure there is a phenomena? You're on the, I don't know. What are your...
I believe that there's, you know, a phenomenon. Again, I use plural phenomena of some kind. Why do I say that? I think there's ample proof. I think that,
but like when you say that, you mean like non-human phenomena? Or
I can't prove the non-human thing. And from a personal standpoint, this isn't a cop-out, and I hope you don't take it as one. I really don't know. I don't know the answer to that part of it.
I say the same thing. I'm just curious what your question is. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, when it comes to the non-human intelligence, the extraterrestrial question, I just genuinely don't know. I am that kind of person that needs to see to believe. So from a personal standpoint, I need the proof. I need the evidence. So from that standpoint, I just don't know. But I can say that I'm open to it. And why am I open to it? I believe that there's ample evidence to support the openness to it. And that comes, just from official verifiable evidence, not
that's interesting.
Someone told me in a dark alley somewhere.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with that, but rather there are too many cases throughout government files that show technology that were beyond the scope of the technology at that time. Meaning, when you go back to even some of the Project Blue Book cases, when you look at some of the estimates of how fast they were going, what type of technology was being displayed, even the 1976 Iran incident, where it seemingly and strategically shut down 2 separate F-4 Phantom jets. When you look at that, and then here in 2024 can't attribute that to any type of technology, that's when I say that I'm open to some of these more extraordinary possibilities, albeit a little less likely than something easily explainable, right?
Sure.
So I recognize that, but I'm also open to it. And one of those bigger reasons why I'm open to it, other than what I just mentioned, is the fact that the government just can't simply stop lying about what's going on with all of this. And I think that if it was top secret classified technology, you would never have the traction that you've gotten here in the last few years of these investigative programs. Are they playing a game of charades and, just wanting to appease the general public? Sure. Yeah, maybe. But you're then discounting the decades worth of evidence that in some cases, when they were written, the Freedom of Information Act wasn't passed. So they never thought some of this information would ever be out in the open. And yet here we are. So when you look at the totality of all that evidence, that's where that openness has to be there, just based on investigation, research, and common sense. So even though aliens are not the number one thing I go around preaching about, and non-human intelligence is not my number one possibility here, I'm absolutely open to it. And that's why I'm open to people like David Grusch who come out and say, hey, the government has wreckage from non-human technology and craft, that there's bodies, the biologics that he referenced. I am definitely open to that, because the level of secrecy that I've seen over the decades, not only from personal research, but from the evidence at hand, that could start to make certain things make sense. But you have a big gap between this dot and this dot over here. It's huge. So you have to connect that dot. And for me, that dot from point A to point B isn't connected yet. Am I open? Absolutely. That's why I listen to it. I think most debunkers just will dismiss it, but they're not actively trying to confirm anything. They're just out there going, well, it's too extraordinary, so it can't be true. Well, I don't operate off of that. That's why I file those FOIAs. FOIA is not everything, but it does offer that peek. And look what happened. We got a stack of documents, communications, text messages between Christopher Mellon and Sean Kirkpatrick. That was a bit of a surprise to me. When you look at what then comes to you through FOIA, you can't help but just say, hey, look, there's more to the story than what we're just hearing in these other podcasts and YouTube channel shows and stuff like that. There is a lot going on behind the scenes that we're not privy to, and FOIA is pulling some of it out. What you got on your screen there is a prime example.